Hi everyone. Nice to see so many faces. Thanks for coming in. It's really nice to be able to do this. So Ali kind of gave you the breakdown of my competitive career. I'll give you a little background on who I am. I'm from Toronto. I'm 35 years old. I was born and raised in Toronto. I started skating when I was 2. The first time I stepped on the ice, I was 13 months old. My mom is from South Africa, who was actually on the call. Hi, Mom. My dad was teaching her to skate, and I wasn't old enough to be carried around on the ice unless I had skates on. So they put double bladers on me, and I just started walking, and I started walking around the ice. And after that, I was always begging to skate. Ended up in skating lessons just before I turned 3. And apparently, when I was 5, my mom asked if I wanted to win the Olympics, and I said no. Sorry, if I want to go to the Olympics. I said no, I want to win the Olympics. Totally ruined my punchline there. So as Ali said, I skated my entire life, competed for Canada for 18 years. Many ups and downs, many great experiences. Learned a lot as an athlete, and having been still transitioning, because I think once you've been an athlete, you're always in transition in some capacity. I mean, I think all of us in life are in some sort of transition at all times, but the major shift from retiring from athletics is a very big one. And with that, I've noticed a lot of skills that I picked up along the way, and how these skills have helped me post-career. And so I'm going to touch mostly on attitude and winning attitude on and off the field of play, and how important it is to bring the right attitude to any task that you encounter in life. So to rewind a little bit, Sochi was my Olympic debut. Ended up, unfortunately, only being my only Olympics, so I'll get to that in a bit. But I went to the Olympics at 29 years old, and that was my first games. So rewind to 5 years old. It was a 24-year trek, quite a long time. And I was lucky enough to go to my games and be seasoned, and mature enough to understand what everything meant and where it was coming from. I also had, on the downside, all of that time to build it up into this mythical event. And I knew going into the event that the way I prepared myself mentally and emotionally for the games would be the make or break for me. As it is for most athletes. I don't think there are many, barring injuries, many athletes that show up to the game not trained. I was the most trained I had ever been. I was skating the best I'd ever skated up to that point in my career. I was fit and ready to go, and I was pumped. I, however, arrived at the games with a pretty severe infection in both of my feet. I had a bad athlete's foot infection on both feet that actually turned into an abscess to the point I couldn't put my feet in my skates without getting injections of freezing into both of my feet every day, twice a day, so I could practice. So for 2 weeks, I was getting these massive needles pushing freezing, I guess, into my foot, and it felt like molten lava was being injected into my foot each time. And actually the bruising from the needles as it wore off was just as painful. And so my Olympic experience, when I look back on it, I always remember all the great things, and I remember all the amazing things that happened and my great attitude that I had, but I also was faced with this. And I think the thing that worked for me was that I took such a strong stance on the type of experience I wanted to have and the attitude with which I decided to bring to that experience. And it was one of, no matter what happens, I'm not just going to lay it all out there, but I'm going to enjoy every moment. And I saw a lot of athletes, some that were younger and it was their first games, or some that were veterans and, this was their last shot. And I saw a lot of people making it into, they were treating it like it was the Olympics. And I think you can understand what I mean by that, is that they let themselves acknowledge and fixate on the magnitude of all of it, as opposed to accepting it and saying, you know what, yeah, it is the Olympics, and I've trained my entire life to be here, and I'm here to do just that, do my job. And so I decided to have the time of my life, and I did. And it was the lightest skating that I had done in my career until that moment. And things just kind of worked. And I think it was because I chose to trust myself and let go of the steering wheel and let my training take over, regardless of the foot injections, regardless of all of that, regardless of the pressure. I felt ready and I believed in that. And that attitude started months and months and months before I even got to the games. And it was something that I had to practice day in and day out, because I think we are what we do repeatedly. And that attitude has to be practiced, in rehearsal, in other competitions. It's like a muscle, and it's habitual. And so these types of decisions and these types of mentalities that we choose to use when faced with adversity or stress or excitement, arousal, all of it pumps us up. And that fallback has to be practiced so that we know it's there and we're not flailing in the dark. Fast forward, after those games, shortly after those games, my partnership ended with Kirsten, kind of out of nowhere, and I was kind of left not knowing what to do. I was almost 30, not feeling done, and I was kind of written off by my coaches at the time, and I decided I wasn't done. And so Luba, who Ali actually did a very good job pronouncing, Lubov Ilyushechkina, actually moved to Canada from Russia to skate with me. And it was completely different. I moved clubs after 13 years with the same people and had to reinvent myself as an athlete. And I saw very quickly how important my attitude had to change with this partnership, because I was dealing with not only a different person and a different set of coaches and in a different environment, but someone who had grown up with a different culture and been raised in sport with a completely different mentality. And so going in there, having just come off an Olympic silver medal and fourth at Worlds, my best season of my career, I had to be willing to park all of that and empty my cup so I could fully learn from that next phase of my career. And I made the choice to keep going with a new circumstance. So it was up to me to make the choice to open my mind and take a humble mentality towards what I was doing. It wasn't so much that I had to let go of everything I had learned. I kept it with me as confidence and something to rely on, but patience and bringing the attitude of the long-term goal and building this person who, at the time, Luba hadn't competed for 3 years. And so my attitude had to switch to being that of having a good perspective and making sure that each day was a small puzzle piece in the grand scheme of the big picture, and making sure that each puzzle piece mattered. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't, we had our struggles. I had my struggles with the partnership. It was up and down. The Russian Federation didn't want to release her at first. We finally got the Canadian immigration minister himself to sign her citizenship about 2 months before the games. And we were building at that point. We were second in the country. We had placed sixth at Worlds the year before the games, going into 2018 Olympics. And then 3 weeks before the national championships, I had a freak accident where a door landed on my face while I was lying in a Pilates studio and knocked me unconscious. And I had a major concussion and stitches and a broken bone in my hand. And this was to be my last shot at the games. And so everything kind of just came crashing down immediately and all of a sudden. And I tried to compete at nationals to make the Olympic team. I was still concussed, which I did not allow myself to acknowledge, as any good athlete does. But it was do or die, and I gave it what I thought was my all, what I had at that time, and that was the end of my career. And so, retiring after that was a very interesting experience, because it really tested everything I had learned. It really tested my resolve, my strength of character. It forcefully caused me to question who I am and what my absolute truths are in life. And at that point, up till that point, pretty much my entire identity was wrapped around being an athlete, being a figure skater, and it ended very abruptly. And moving forward, I had always had this passion for performing, and it was starting to grow, and I was starting to understand it over the last like 6 years of my career. And I started realizing I wanted to try acting. And so I decided to take one of those many, many lessons that thank you, Mom, all that money for sport taught me. And I threw myself into classes right away. I decided, what better way to grow from this experience by making myself uncomfortable in something new that I don't know. And so I put myself into acting class, and I learned very quickly how my athletic mentality and the attitude you take towards learning would come into play. And I also learned that letting go of certain things was the only way in also. And so it was a combination of owning my strength and everything I had learned, and letting go of things that no longer served me, which was very difficult to do, because your strength as an athlete is directly tied to your ego. Your confidence is largely derived from your ability to endure and your ability to outlast and outtrain and outperform and outdo things versus yourself, versus other people. It's a constant push. And in acting, it's a complete surrender. And so it was fascinating to watch myself and experience myself go through this group therapy type kind of situation where you have to talk about your feelings, and as athletes, your feelings are kind of secondary. You got to get your job done, and sit in those moments and get to know myself. And the more I went in with an excited attitude towards experiencing all the parts of me that scared me, and being enthusiastic and excited about challenging myself and feeling naked in front of people and feeling like I was a fish out of water, I realized this attitude that you take in sport to, at the top end of sport, you're looking at like millimeter improvements for 200% work. And that you really get to know what you're made of in that kind of test. And I found that really changes the way you see things and the attitude with which you bring to challenges. And I realized that I had to continue to push my decision-making process in terms of what kind of attitude I was going to have, what kind of actor, what kind of human being is Dylan without figure skating, and how strong I could be with being vulnerable, and how willing I was to be uncomfortable and thrive in that. And so since then, I've done a lot of up and downs. I've sat in audition waiting rooms waiting to do a commercial audition with like 25 other people in the room that look almost the same as me, while I sit on a stool and ride a fake bicycle for someone with no lines. And that's where I started after being, competing at the world level mere months before. And it's very humbling, and it shakes you up a little bit. It challenges the way you perceive the world and the way you perceive yourself. And since then, I've been doing, I've done a Netflix show, which was very interesting, and I've done a bit of modeling. I've started screenwriting. I've had plenty of ideas jumbling around in my head, and I started to jump in a class and learn how to tell a story in a screen format, which has been fascinating and amazing. And then on top of that, I've gone to pursue my other passion, which is broadcasting and public speaking, but broadcasting with my show with Asher Hill on CBC called That Figure Skating Show. So I get to stay involved with figure skating. I get to pass forward my experiences and the wisdom I acquired over 8 million years of being a figure skater. And it's been an interesting ride. It's a continually shifting ride, and moving into this, it just reconfirms everything that I've been learning and discovering and rediscovering, that, when we're placed in these situations that are filled with uncertainty and fear and isolation and separation, you really have an opportunity to get to know yourself and ask yourself the hard questions and visit the things that are scary to visit. And also really come to terms with your absolute truths. What are the things that are most important to you in your life? And what are the things that you do that are crutches that you're using to hide from other things? And while this time sucks, it is an opportunity for humanity, I think, to heal and reassess how we can all be better pieces of the whole moving forward, and how we can be better at our jobs, we can be better family members and friends, and how we can be better members of society and better to ourselves, better versions of ourselves. And I think that all ties into the same mentality of being an athlete, and that's always striving for better, but without judgment of yourself. Having a patient, encouraging, loving wind behind your back, and just keeping yourself moving forward and taking each day as it comes, and just trying to set the kind of attitude that you want to have to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve and learn whatever it is you want to learn during this unfortunate time that at the same time gives us the gift of time. Erica, how did you practice the attitude you mentioned in your training or other competitions? What exactly did that look like? Great question. One of the biggest shifts in my career was Kung Fu. I started doing Kung Fu with Elvis Stoiko's Sifu, which means instructor, when I was 19, and that really realigned my understanding of mental performance. I worked with him for many years and brought all of that training into my everyday routine. And it doesn't have to be that. Meditation, mindfulness, like all of these different practices where you're tapping into your awareness and your understanding of how your mind works under pressure. So treating your mind like a muscle, and then understanding what you need it to do, and then practicing it day in and day out, and not just on the ice, but in your everyday life. If you're dealing with traffic, if you're dealing with difficult conversations, if you're dealing with anything, it's deciding to fill the cup that you want to have there for you when you need it. And it's we are what we do repeatedly, and I think that really applies to our mentality. From my dear mother, Linda, from what you've learned over the years, what advice would you give young athletes and their parents in pursuit of their dreams? Good question. It is so difficult to tell an athlete and their parents the right way to do it. There are so many right ways to get there, but there are essential components that have to happen. And I think making sure you're surrounded by people you trust, and there's a positive environment, but one that you can thrive in where you're challenged. I think healthy competition is one of the best motivators an athlete can find. Having specialists around you that will help you to achieve your top level of performance by making sure that you're a complete and well-rounded athlete. And then on top of that, I think it's having a thirst for knowledge and understanding. And, a race car driver understands what's under the hood. I think every athlete should at least have a basic understanding of what their tool does, their body and their mind, and how it needs to be fine-tuned to perform at its best, and what is required of them to be able to reach the upper echelon of any given sport. And I think we live in a time of information being ready at your fingertips, and there's not really any excuse to at least be able to research something is such a huge asset. And I think making sure that you're on top of things and you understand all the extras you can do. But I really think above all that, you need to have fun. You need to have fun. You need to love what you do, having a passion for something. You want to make someone run a 4-minute mile. You don't give them something to run from, you give them something to run to. And I think being creative and figuring out ways to dangle a carrot, and sometimes a new carrot, and get that person to really want to achieve that next goal, whether it's a small milestone or it's the big dream. I think you will always walk away from sport with many, many, many positive things if you approach it with that holistic kind of attitude. Again, what's one thing you wish people knew about you or your sport? Oh. Well, I'll start with my sport. I think, unless you really think about it, you only kind of realize it. Figure skating is probably time-wise one of the highest maintenance sports you can find in terms of preparation. We really only have 6 to 7 major events a year, and we spend the rest of our time training. Probably take 2 to 3 weeks off, like total a year. And the rest of the time we're doing choreography in the spring. We're fine-tuning our routine. It takes like I would say at least 6 months for your programs to really start hitting stride before they're in your body. And it's constant repetition. You do the same tricks once you're at kind of the peak of your career, almost your whole career, and you can still miss them. It's a very fragile sport in terms of execution, and in terms of percentage of success in practice versus competition, it's probably one of the lower percentages in terms of sports, because it's just being able to there's so many variables that can happen in the moment, and you're on ice, and depending on when you skate in the warm-up group or in the starting order, you could be dealing with bad ice, and you could hit a chunk of ice or a hole, and that could be your season. And there are so many things that you're dealing with at any given time, and you have to take a leap of faith beyond most sports that I have recognized. One thing I wish people knew about me. I guess that I'm also learning. I'm more of an artist than I thought I was. I was always like a hardcore athlete. Like, I love to perform, but I was intensity. I'd out-train people. I'd be focused. I'd be mentally strong. I'd be ready to go. And that was my skill. I was stable, and I was both physically and mentally. I was the rock in the partnership. And since removing myself from competitive sport, I've realized that I have a much more of an artistic soul than I ever allowed myself to realize. And it's been my life now getting to know that. As a CanFund alumni, can you share from Ali, how support from CanFund impacted your journey? Absolutely. Figure skating is one of the most expensive sports out there. I think it always kind of ranks in the top 3. At one point, my partner and I were paying over $100,000 a year to live and train, and the funding across the Canadian board for Sport Canada is the same. And so certain sports, your month-to-month output is not as much. And not to say they don't need the money too, but sometimes it's very difficult to make ends meet. CanFund helped me a lot in, sometimes it was just paying those bills, and sometimes it was something big, like before the Sochi Games, Kirsten and I had our programs choreographed and they weren't working. So we had to fly to Vancouver in June and re-choreograph a free program, redo a new free program. And that money made it possible. We wouldn't have been able to do that otherwise. And it ended up working out quite well for us. So, that access, the ability to have those funds when we needed them most, and when we needed to make a big change, it was invaluable.